This idea that you cannot build muscle as you age is absolutely ridiculous and wrong. And I actually am stronger and more powerful at 61 than I was at 25. I am in better shape now than I was then. It turns out allulose in a 10 to 15 gram dose raises GLP-1. It's so powerful that you can take allulose and eat a candy bar and lower your blood sugar because it causes a release of insulin. Well, that's super cool. Maybe we should get rid of the other sugars and just use allulose that's actually therapeutic. One of the challenges I see out in our world is I see people majoring in the minors when they haven't even majored in the majors, getting a red light therapy and they haven't even figured out how to meditate yet, or they're worried about oxalates and they haven't even really dealt in their protein levels yet. You've got to figure out the right thing for you at the right time of your life with the goals that you have.
JJ, at this point in your career, your focus for yourself and the people you work with is to help them age powerfully. Talk about what you mean by this.
Yes, well, specifically, not gracefully. It's interesting. I had big plans for my 50th birthday and what I wanted to accomplish by then. And I hit all my goals. And then I kind of, for the next 8 years, was sort of like going through the motion. And I started buying into the narrative. And the narrative as you age is, you shouldn't be doing those things anymore, and don't wear that, and all of this stuff, right? And so now I'm approaching my 60th birthday, and I was talking to Dr. Mark Hyman. He goes, people who are positive about aging live 7.5 years longer than those who don't. And I thought, well, there's an easy one. I'll just do that. And I thought, what if you could get in the best shape of your life in your 60s, in your 70s, in your 80s? Because, you start to listen to this stuff and you hear about the muscle mass loss that starts to happen at 30. And then by 40, you lose 1% of your muscle a year and 2 to 4% of your strength and 6 to 8% of your power. And I go, what if I could actually be in the same or better shape than I was in my 20s? So that's what I set out to do. And I took my husband with me. We went and got DEXA scans. The fun thing was my DEXA scan was the same at 59 as it was at 39. And I set out to be good or better than in my 20s. And the cool thing is now there's so much more that we know, right? I've been in the field for 40 years, but gosh, there were a lot of things. There's so much more research now. But if you look at what happens as we age, and the reason I talk about aging powerfully is because as we age, the biggest thing we lose is power, physical power. And I think, Jesse, that translates into mental power and into life power. So we lose physical power, that fast twitch muscle fiber. We can't move as fast. In fact, they say that after the age of 30, only 1% of us will ever sprint again. And it's largely because we're just losing these fast twitch fibers. And as I started to talk more about, my experiment and what I was doing to increase my fast twitch fibers and increase muscle, increase power, and I had women leaning in, asking me what I was doing. The biggest thing that I heard from them is, well, I don't want to do what you're doing because I don't want to. What do you think they said? I don't want to
work hard. I don't want to
get
prioritize
big.
myself.
I don't want to get big.
There you go.
I don't want to get big. And so it made me really double down into this idea of aging powerfully. Because I thought, you know what? First of all, in 40 years of working with people, I've never had someone work out, lift heavy weights, and get big. They get toned, they get defined, they get strong, but they don't get big per se, right? And then I also thought, but you know what, women? We have played small our whole lives. We're shrinking. We're trying to make ourselves smaller, tinier. You look at the diet books, and for the men, it's like, get bigger, stronger. And for the women, it's like, get smaller, tinier. I go, maybe it's time to get big and to show up stronger and to get powerful, right? So that's kind of the double entendre of this aging powerfully. And the idea that while aging's a privilege, let's be real, aging powerfully is definitely a choice.
You mentioned that aspect of people not wanting to get big in the female category. There's also this whole aspect of negativity towards the ability to build muscle later in age too. So it's kind of like these two extremes. And let's talk about the latter here, because for a lot of people, even myself included, as a male who's starting to be middle-aged, you hear often that the best you can do is maintain what you have. So let's talk about somebody who is tuning in, say they're 40 and beyond, male or female, and maybe they haven't prioritized building that power, that muscle. What hope do they have at that point for building that up and not just maintaining?
Let's stop listening to this ridiculous narrative because the research is showing the opposite. The research is showing that older muscle is no different than younger muscle. There are some specific things that we can see in aging muscle, but we can counteract all of them. So this idea that you cannot build muscle as you age is absolutely ridiculous and wrong. And I actually am stronger and more powerful at 61 than I was at 25. I am in better shape now than I was then. And just, I started lifting weights when I was 16. So I've always lifted weights. I literally did it with the high school football team because girls didn't go to gyms back then, right? So I want to just preface it with that. Now, when I went to get a DEXA scan, I took my husband with me, and my husband's been athletic his whole life and eaten healthy his whole life. And this is why it's so important to start this whole thing with really understanding what your weight's made up of, and also understanding, doing some basic tests to know your fitness level. So we go to do this, and a DEXA scan has been used for years to look at bone mineral density, but now they're able to look at your your skeletal muscle and your body fat, and also where that body fat is located. They're also going to be able to look at a predicted VO2 max here pretty quick too, and a cardiovascular scan. So really cool technology coming out, especially for something that's like $100. So we went and did this. And what's interesting is my husband, now, women have about 10 to 15% essential fat on our body. That's how much, fat we need to have to survive. So a healthy woman will have somewhere in the 18 to 25% body fat range. If she's super athletic, maybe she's 15%. A healthy male, they have 3 to 5% essential fat, and they'll have somewhere in the 10 to 18% range. And these were the norms I learned in grad school. What I've discovered is they've made these norms bigger now. And I'm like, I'm not buying into that narrative because that's not right. Like, these are, body fat is not healthy to carry around when you get too much of it, especially if it's visceral adipose tissue. So Tim's body fat, athletic guy, eating healthy, exercising, was 25%. Kind of shocking. And there were some things I'd say he was like kind of phoning it in at the gym, between you and me. And his diet needed to be tightened up a little bit. Like, he would eat healthy food, but he would eat too much healthy food, and too much healthy food's unhealthy. It's going to give you, it's got to go somewhere, and it was going to fat on his body. So over the course of 8 months, he actually dropped 27 pounds of fat and put on 24 pounds of muscle at 58. And I will tell you that now at 59, he is in the best shape of his life. He is stronger than he's ever been. He's lifting, he's doing beach volleyball with people half his age. And so I say that because there is this narrative out there that, we can't build muscle, that you should be just trying to slowly decline. And I really want to flip that script to go, you know what? We have so much more information now out there that we didn't have before. And you probably have one of the things that's the most important for getting in great shape. And that's like, you probably have a little more time now than you did in your 20s and 30s when things were totally chaotic. And so you can, and if you kind of forgot to work out over the last decade or two, right? Or maybe you've just been doing walking, you can absolutely turn this around. Whether you're 40, 50, 60, 80, you can turn this around. So the big takeaway is, don't buy into that narrative. I just want to crush that narrative that's out there, because the studies aren't showing it to be the case at all.
And I want to talk a little bit more about that DEXA scan, because it's so important to look at beyond weight and the actual body composition, because what can happen, and this will likely happen if you're not working out and you're not eating right, as you get older and go from, say, 30 to 60, you may be the same weight overall if you're just using the scale, but you may have replaced a lot of that muscle with fat. And if you're just using that as your reason to continue living the way you're living and not doing some of the things we're going to get into today, diet and lifestyle, you can be tricking yourself and others around you.
Exactly. And if this was my perfect world, we would no longer have scales. We would only do body composition because you've got to know what your weight's made up of. Perfect example is my husband, Tim. He's always weighed the same weight. So he weighed the same weight he'd weighed in college and in high school, but the weight was very different. And when people tell me, oh, I weigh the same as I did, I'm like, yeah, but unless you have actively been doing resistance training, it's not the same. And so what I recommend is to go do a DEXA body scan. Again, inexpensive. Now there's these DEXA fit centers all over the place. So they're easy to find. Get it done every 6 months. It's going to look at bone mineral density, but bone mineral density is really a lagging indicator. It's sort of like blood sugar. By the time your blood sugar is high, you've been insulin resistant for a while. By the time your bone mineral density is not good, you have not had enough muscle and you haven't built quality muscle. It's been a problem for a while. So step one, we're looking at bone mineral density, but we're really looking at what's called your appendicular lean mass index. And it's your skeletal muscle mass. And then they equate it to like norms for your age. And you want to be an overachiever. You want to be in the top 25%. You can also see if that muscle mass is even, if it's fat infiltrated, we want to be fillets, not ribeyes. And then it's going to look at your overall body fat, but also where that fat's located. And while we don't want to have high body fat, it's not, it's not a great thing. The bigger problem is where it's located. So if you have a lot of subcutaneous fat in your hips and thighs, that's not going to be problematic like having visceral adipose tissue around your organs. So that's the cool thing, is it will give you all of this information. Then you can come home and buy an inexpensive bioimpedance scale and correlate it, because the bioimpedance scales are based on total body water. They send a resistance wave through your body and they predict how much fat you have and how much skeletal muscle mass you have. But it's a prediction based on total body water, and that fluctuates. And so what I have people do is get a bioimpedance scale for home that reads into their phone, and then get on it every single day, same time of day. Like get up in the morning, go to the bathroom, get on the scale, and then track it so that you see the trend improving over time. You're really looking at what happened over the week, not what happened day to day, because weight's going to fluctuate day to day. And making sure that your total body water is increasing while your body fat's decreasing, that you're holding on to or building muscle while you're losing fat. And improving body composition, losing weight. Like if you wanted to lose weight, I'd say, you know what? Eat more of a very low carb so that you get rid of all your glycogen stores, moderate to high protein and some fat, low calorie diet, and sit on the couch, or even go low protein, higher fat, low carb, sit on the couch, because you'll lose muscle, you'll lose total body water, and you'll lose weight fast, and you'll damage your metabolism, right? But if you're doing what my husband did, where he basically dropped fat, put on muscle, it's like watching grass grow. But the change is way more permanent. You're not damaging your metabolism. You're adding that muscle that's going to dictate a better resting metabolic rate. So you don't have what's called metabolic adaptation, where you lose weight and your metabolism downshifts more than it should. So it's super critical. You have to track. You have to know what your weight's made up of. The other important thing there is not just do your weight, but the way you can monitor that visceral adipose tissue is to add in a waist measurement. And I like to do a waist to height, because being 6 feet tall, I was like, why should I have the same ideal waist measurement as a 5 foot tall person? This makes no sense. But there's Bluetooth tape measures too. There's one from a company called Renpho, RENPHO, and that will read into your phone. So once a week, you can do your hip and your waist, because I like to do waist to hip and waist to height, and it will give you the averages over time as well. So you can correlate that all with that DEXA. So DEXA 1 to 2 times a year, bioimpedance daily, waist and hip weekly.
And you mentioned bioimpedance, being able to get one of those pretty affordably. Is there a certain brand of that you recommend?
So Renpho has a $20 one. So that's why I say there's like, you can't even make a price objection anymore on these. I have a $5,000 Tanita bioimpedance scale at home. These things used to be really expensive. Renpho now $20 on Amazon. Oxaline Pro, not on Amazon, has got the highest ratings out there. Both of those have a Bluetooth piece to them. Both of them read me higher than a DEXA does. But again, it's like anything. It's like using an Oura ring for HRV. You're just monitoring the change, right? It's not going to be as accurate as other things.
If you're enjoying the episode, let me know by clicking like and subscribe below. Thank you so much. And now back to the show. You talked about this dramatic change with your husband, Tim, in his mid to late 50s. I think this would be a great case study if he's open to, you know better than me, if he's open to sharing, well, through you, what he went through, because I'm sure there's a lot of people tuning in today that are in a similar boat.
I know. Well,
what did he do?
It's all public. He's like, okay, yeah, go ahead. Cause I use him as a case study. And I was showing like swimsuit photos of him at different events. And he's like, honey, come on, really? So I did a YouTube video on this as well. So here's what he did. Now, one of the things that he did that I wish we could have done differently, because then I would have had better data, because he also went on testosterone. So that is going to have some impact. But that alone wouldn't have done what we did. So the first thing, and as I walk you through this is really what I would do with anybody. The first thing that I had him do was I had him do a macro audit of what he was eating. And so that he could really see what did he need to do to maintain his weight on a daily basis. If you use an app, and I like to use the Chronometer app to track your food, and you do it for a week and you're just curious, you are not judgmental, you're just curious, and you really are looking for, what do I eat in terms of protein, fat, and carbs each day? How many calories do I need on average over the week? Because if you do it for a week, you'll get really clear on what do I need per day to maintain my weight. And that's important if you do want to lose some body fat and do a caloric restriction, you got to know what your average calories are. So he started with that. The next thing that we did was optimize his protein. Now, I had been on him about this, but he had not listened to me until we did the body composition. When we did the DEXA, then everything changed. And so I had him do a gram per pound of target body weight, which is target body weight was 175, 180. So he was doing 180 grams of protein a day in 3 to 4 meals. Prior to that, we'd been playing around with having breakfast after we were doing fasted workouts for a bit. That did not work for either of us. We can come back to that. But, we've always been good about, we eat breakfast about an hour or two after waking up in the morning. Ideal is more like 2 hours. We stop eating 3 to 4 hours before bed. So he was eating 3 to 4 meals a day to get the protein in and tracking it. So that was the first thing that he did, was I just had him prioritize protein. And just by starting to track, it made him aware, because he would in the evening before dinner, like pile on the Siete chips with some hummus, grab a handful of cashews. And he started to realize, he was overloading by doing that stuff. So he started to pull out that stuff and really focus on a protein-rich breakfast, which he generally does this coconut yogurt that's got protein in it, stirs in more protein, does a protein cereal with it, and then or a smoothie. So that tends to be breakfast. Lunches usually will make like grass-fed burgers or turkey burgers or chicken. He'll do that with some brown rice and some veggies. And then dinner is always some kind of animal protein with a load of vegetables and some berries. So pretty simple stuff. Went to that. And then the next thing that we did was start to really ramp up his resistance training. He was just kind of going through the motions, sort of in a rut. And so now he's doing pull-ups and squats and all of that. And then we added in creatine, urolithin A from Mitapure. I'm trying to think if there's some ginseng. But those were the big ones, were getting in enough protein, getting an optimal protein. If anything, we go between 180 and like 220 a day, adding in the creatine, adding in the urolithin A. When we go to the gym, we take electrolytes with essential amino acids as well, just to cover our bases. I think essential amino acids, especially as we age, are a really good kind of hedge your bets thing to use. So those were the big changes. And then he also added in some HIIT training by starting to do some beach volleyball. And then we also, on the exercise front, the way I like to start people is by first doing a little audit of how much you move. And so that's the other thing that he started to focus on, was just getting more movement in throughout the day, like not sitting as much, getting in at least 10,000 steps each day and doing some walks after meals. So we started getting that in there as well. So up the resistance training, added in some HIIT training, made sure he was moving more all throughout the day. And then, of course, increasing the protein, getting in the creatine, and dumping some of the overall calories, because he was just getting in a lot through things like, Siete chips and nuts.
All right. A couple follow-up questions on that. First being, for somebody who's younger, how would that protocol differ, if at all? Say they're in their, early 30s versus late 50s.
Yeah. So starting at age, it's interesting when you look at muscle mass development in our 20s, we can get away with a lot. Like, I think about me in my 20s, that was when I was playing around with being a vegan, lifting weights, and I could get away with it. Whereas when you start to hit 30, now you're not reliant on your hormones like you used to be. You're reliant on protein plus resistance training to really hit muscle protein synthesis. So it's really 30 plus. It's all going to be the same. The only shift will be for men. It used to be the average age for testosterone to start to decrease was in around 57. Now I'm betting it's earlier due to the stress. So for men, it's the testosterone side. For women, it's the estrogen testosterone side. But really for everybody, it's still going to be the same. And when I look at like the pillars for powerful aging, and something that you want to start as early as possible, just like, when do you want to start saving for retirement? As early as possible. Now, does that mean that if, oops, I forgot, like literally that would be me. Oops, I forgot to save for retirement. I started in my 50s. It doesn't mean don't ever start. It just means start as soon as you can. And, if that's 50, that's fine, or 60, that's fine. But same with this. You want to start thinking about putting on as much muscle as possible and improving your VO2 max as much as possible, so that you can maintain this as long as possible, right? And stay functional as long as possible. So I start people, and the first thing that I have them do is make sure that they've got that protein dialed in. I have a protein calculator and an Eat Protein First challenge to take them through that. And the first thing we focus on is macro audit. Let's see what you need. And then optimize protein. And then we upgrade the plate. And if we need to lose body fat, I do a cycling caloric restriction protocol where protein's optimized so that you're able to hold on to or build muscle. And just like what Tim did, you can do what's called body recomposition if protein's optimized and you've got caloric restriction, you can still build muscle. So that's the step one. The step two, and then of course, I think creatine for everybody, especially for women, optimizing vitamin D and fish oil. So those are a couple that I'm really keen on. I'm also very keen on Mitopure urolithin A, because you want to clean out those mitochondria and be able to use that to regenerate. And one of the things that happens as our muscle starts to age is that regeneration decreases, inflammation increases, which is why fish oil can be really important. And doing an omega-3 and omega quant to understand your 6:3 ratio so that you're not pro-inflammatory. So you've got increased inflammation, decreased regeneration. So fish oil, Mitopure, and then your muscles and nerves don't communicate as well. They're not connecting as well. And that's where you just continue to challenge with different movements to keep your muscles and nerves commenting and communicating well. And you start to lose fast twitch. That's starting around age 30. So all this stuff is kind of 30 plus that we need to focus on. And in the exercise realm, that means that while I'm pushing resistance training, I'm really looking at resistance training with a focus, an eye towards strength and power, meaning let's add in some speed and let's add in some heavy.
When you say add in speed, let's talk about specifics there.
Okay. So I have a progression for exercise, and I think it's really important because otherwise someone could be hearing this and go, okay, I'm going to do that. And they've basically been doing nothing prior to that, and they'll go do this and then they'll be done. They'll be out. And that's what I want to avoid at all costs. To me, just like I talked about the macro audit for food, when you start with exercise, same thing. I want to see where you're starting from. So, how do we do that? Well, first of all, that's where the DEXA scan comes in because it's going to tell us what's going on with your muscle. But it's not going to really tell us the quality of that muscle. And we really need to get some metrics for that as well. But apparently, with this new VO2 Max addition, that'll be one important thing that we can see is you'll know your overall body fat and are your muscles infiltrated. But if you can also get a VO2 Max from your DEXA to give a prediction of how much energy, how much oxygen you use at max output when you're doing running or cycling, it is the number one predictor to overall health and longevity, your VO2 max. It's just have you done that test?
It's been a long time. I think back in
Right.
university when I was taking human kinetics, but I'm sure it's changed a lot since then.
I don't think it's changed. It's the same awful, horrible test. Like that terrible tight fitting mask and you're on a treadmill or you're on a bike. I mean, I I went into biomechanics in grad school because I hated the ex-phys lab so much. I was like, stay out of there. They're going to make you put that mask on and then they're going to like draw blood. I don't want to do it. So the fact that we could do a predicted one is so fabulous. But first of all, knowing where you're starting, super duper important. Tracking, doing an activity audit. How many steps are you getting a day? Like, I'm not going to focus on going out and having someone do resistance training if they're like the average person who's getting in 2,500 to 4,000 steps a day. The first thing I'm going to have them do is let's get those steps up to 8 to 12,000 steps. And once you hit 8,000, let's raise that floor to 10,000 and then raise it to 12,000. So let's get you moving more all throughout the day. Let's add some intensity to a couple days of that movement by adding in a rucking vest, adding in a little speed, throwing in some hills. So that's just your everyday. Then I add in the resistance training foundation to get you really your body moving through exercises. I always say, you don't go to the gym or work out at home to get better at working out at home or get better at training at the gym. You're doing these things to get better at life. And so if that's the case, that's my argument for doing compound movements, doing free weights, body weight, the things that will translate more to activities of daily living. In life, we have to squat. In life, we have to push things over our head. In life, we have to pick things up off the floor. So let's mimic that when we're working out so that we don't get hurt in life. Like, let's put it into a controlled environment first, push it heavy, push it with speed, and then go out in life. So I start people with basic resistance training of things like, hip and thigh hinging, squats and deadlifts, upper body pushing, push-ups and dips and overhead presses, upper body pulling, things like pull-ups and bent over rows, all using your core. And then as you have that foundation in place, then you want to, because hypertrophy is different than building strength and power. You'll build some strength when you're building muscle, but if you really want to focus on the strength and power, strength is how much, you can lift something one time. How much of a weight can you lift one time? And to build strength, you work in a lower rep range, like 1 to 6 reps. And power is how fast can you move something. So, and building muscle tends to be more in the 6 to 30 rep range. But it turns out there's some training called high velocity resistance training where you can go heavy and fast and kind of accomplish all of that. So I like people to work in different ranges, but once you've got the foundation to add in some of the speed. Turns out, I don't know if you've heard about this, Jesse, but like 30 plus, it's like 1% of us will ever sprint again. Like we just stop pushing the fast movement. I know I got a sprint treadmill for my 60th birthday because I'm like, that will not be me. I will be sprinting. But things, how can you put in some power? It can be things like kettlebell swings, medicine ball throws, box jumps, even just air squats over a chair that you add a jump into. You can use a TRX to do assisted jumps if you're afraid of like hurting yourself, getting on a sprint treadmill and adding in a run, or getting on a Peloton and doing some Tabata stuff. So adding in some speed, because that's the biggest thing we lose.
All right, you shared a lot there about the progression and getting to the speed piece later on and the steps. Talk about when somebody has taken that time and built up, what the end goal might look like.
So, when you look at this, you really want a well-designed, comprehensive program that is going to hit all of the things that we want to focus on as we age. So what happens as we age? Okay, we lose muscle, strength, power. So those have to be incorporated in. Our VO2 max drops. What's cool about VO2 max is like everything seems to help it. Long, slow distance cardio helps it. Sprint training helps it. Resistance training helps it. So everything seems to improve VO2 max. We also tend to lose our balance and our flexibility, right? So if you look at what we should really be monitoring, like in my perfect world of going to a doctor, they would do a DEXA scan with a predicted VO2 max. Then they would do a grip strength test that's a proxy for overall strength, or a push-up test, right? And you can do these at home, by the way. You can do a predicted VO2 max. There's something called the Cooper test. You can Google it. You can do a predicted push-up test. You can do a power test by doing a vertical wall jump. And you can do a balance test. This one's incredibly hard. It was funny. Do you know Mark Sisson, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Mark and I were in Miami together, and he's like, okay, we were talking about our goals as we age, right? And so one of his is this balance test to be able to do it for a minute. And I'm like, oh, no problem. What you do is you stand on one foot, you raise your other foot up, and you cross your hands over your chest, and you close your eyes. It sounds totally easy. It is totally not easy. It's like I'm sitting there after 15 seconds falling over. But balance is a big one. So that's an easy test that you can do. It's also the one of standing with your feet crossed and then sitting down and standing back up. And you deduct a point for everything you have to use. Like if you use a hand, you deduct a point, and you start at 10, and you want to make sure that you are 8 or above. So for me, I can sit down, but I have to use a hand to get up. And so I'm a 9. So when you're really designing a program, you want to look at, all right, how do I make sure that I have the building muscle, building strength, building power, improving VO2 max, improving balance, strength, flexibility? What would that look like? Here's what it will look like. You're moving more all throughout the day. You've heard, I think, the research that if you work out for 30 minutes and sit for 11 and a half hours, you basically undid the 30 minutes of working out. And that's why for me, I always start with the core of activity, because I think the pandemic did it, where we just got used to not moving as much. I think that was probably one of the biggest things that trashed our metabolic health, was just not moving as much. So that's step one. Then adding in the resistance training. My perfect goal for people is 3 days a week to hit each body part. That is the best for hypertrophy. And then mixing it up between the different types of rep ranges and adding in some speed moves, like adding in, medicine ball throws and burpees and that. And then 2 days a week, adding in some high intensity interval training. And that could be doing things that are strength moves like burpees and mountain climbers, or it could be doing something on a Peloton or doing something on a sprint trainer. But it's basically where you're going all out and recovering and doing different ranges of that. Something that's 20 seconds, maybe with a 20-second recovery, maybe then a minute with a minute recovery, like just changing this stuff around because it's different energy systems. So going anywhere from, say, 20 seconds of all-out effort to 4 minutes of all-out effort. And then adding in a yoga class or a Pilates class, something that's going to challenge your balance, make you stay in isometric positions, work on flexibility. I mean, I was in my yoga class today, and I go to yoga and count every minute. I'm like, okay, I'm 5% through. I'm 10% through. I literally do it. I watch it, but it forces me to do things I will never make myself do. And, you have to focus on all the different planes of movement, on balance, on flexibility as you age, because you truly will lose it if you do not use it.
Let's come back to Tim. You went over what he went through to change his body composition. You talked about how your DEXA scan was just as good or even better than when you were younger. So this won't apply to you, but say a girlfriend in Tim's position, is there any difference of how you approach that protocol to change the body composition from male to female?
Actually, no. There really isn't. I mean, the only thing that you would have to look at, and I will say I improved my DEXA to be better than I was in my 20s. Like I literally did get in the best shape of my life. So it's the fitter you are, the harder it is. It's really fun to start with someone who has not been doing much because you can have such a big impact. And so I say that to motivate you. If you've been like, oh gosh, I forgot to work out, you're going to see such great results. But really, our muscles respond the same. If it's a cycling female, there, are some nuances with, like, is this a time in your cycle when you want to push hard or back off a bit? If you're going through perimenopause, as estrogen starts to drop, it is hard. You're going to be more inflamed. Like I remember when my estrogen dropped, and I'm like, I cannot recover like I used to at the gym. So what you'll find is you can't recover as well. You've got higher inflammation. You're having trouble putting on muscle. You're gaining body fat. So those are important things to know because you want to work with a functional medicine doctor to work through that so that you have minimal effects from menopause, but it's really the hormone flux that's going to be the difference. The rest of it really not. The advantage men will have over women metabolically is just that they tend to have, again, because they have lower body fat by nature than we do, is because they have more muscle mass, they have a better metabolism. But when you break it down and look at us side by side, balancing for that, it's the same. It's just when the hormones start to go sideways.
You talked about the one variable that we can't really account for within Tim's protocol, the testosterone. Talk about when he included that and why he did. And was there a natural attempt at bringing that up before going the medical route?
Yes. And this is, I think, important for anyone considering doing hormone replacement therapy. Is you want to, in my opinion, use, and this is not a doctor's opinion, but only my hammers as a, nutrition and fitness expert are lifestyle and diet. So in supplements, but I believe that you're better off doing everything you can so that you can use the minimum dose for efficacy. And so we treated this the same way. His testosterone was low. It was around 300. And the doctor wanted to see it between 700 and 900. And so, and this is pretty classic. Men go through andropause just like women go through menopause. And, for women, as estrogen goes low, it's going to impact their mood, their brain, their bones, their cardiovascular system. They have trouble building muscle. They store more fat. And men, very similarly, affects their mood, affects their muscles, affects their mind, affects their libido. So, first things that we did were the things that are going to help, but we'd been doing them for a while, which is get great sleep, lift heavy weights. Now we started to crank that up a bit more, but we still didn't get anywhere. His diet was dialed in. So we'd done the things that should help. And it just was a matter of age, right?
And what difference did he notice when he started taking that and how quickly?
Oh, he noticed differences really quickly in overall energy, libido, performance overall, like in every area of his life. Like it was definitely something that he noticed. Just like women with their estrogen dropping and you give them estrogen, it's like the lights come back on again. You can start to think and focus, right? Same thing with him.
And was part of your health journey, you mentioned estrogen, and I think something about your recovery when it started to dip. Was supplementing with that medically part of your health journey?
So here's what's interesting. I used to teach this course to doctors called Overcoming Weight Loss Resistance. And it was all the things that could get in the way of you losing weight. And when I say losing weight, I really mean losing fat, or that could cause you to gain fat. And so thyroid was, of course, one of the things I talked about. Sex hormones was another thing I talked about. And so as I was going through my journey in my late 40s, I remember when my thyroid started to go down, I could feel it and started to notice some loss in my eyebrows. I was getting cold. And so that was the first foray, was getting my thyroid optimized. The next thing was, I remember being at the gym going, I cannot recover like I used to. And then I remember going to the dentist going, I floss my teeth and my gums are bleeding. He goes, oh, your estrogen's dropping. I went, oh. So fortunately for me, I have so many friends in the space. And so the minute that this started to happen, I started to replace, but not just estrogen. Like, we tracked it all. First, I didn't even need estrogen to start. I needed a little testosterone. Some of that converted to estrogen. And I did a little bit of cycling progesterone. And then as the estrogen dropped, I started to use that. But I had been on hormone replacement therapy from the minute my hormones started to drop. Which, when you read about now what the kind of cutting edge doctors in hormone replacement therapy are talking about, that is exactly what they're saying to do, is do it from the minute it started to drop. And the cool thing is, I'd already optimized for everything else. I'd already been testing my adrenals and optimizing adrenal health. Now, I think I could have done better with that. But I was doing the best I could at the time. And I had my thyroid optimized. You've got to have all of that going on. But I'd already done that. And this was the key that was missing for it. And it is, you can do it without. And some people genetically cannot use hormones. But boy, what a difference. I used to work in a doctor's office where I would go and review all the labs with people and put them on a program. And literally, before I even had talked to a client and I was just looking at their labs, I could tell, and these were not, I wasn't looking at their hormones. I was looking at their cardiovascular labs. I could tell if they were on hormones or not, or going through menopause or not, just basically by the cardiovascular shifts that would happen. And they were pretty big, like the inflammation, the LP little a, LDL, like everything would start to go bad as they started to go through this and they weren't on hormones.
A more recent piece of your health journey that ties into hormones is finding some precancerous cells and having a hysterectomy. And you did a YouTube video diving into the depths of this, but can you take us there and explain what you found and what you did leading up to that hysterectomy to prepare your body?
Sure. So I had a little thickened uterine lining. And so I went into the doctor, first I went in for the ultrasound to look at that. And they go, oh, it's a little thick. So I did some progesterone therapy. They said it should be fine. We'll just do a biopsy. It'll be no big deal. Do a biopsy. They're like, oh, we don't like the way this looks. We're going to need to do a DNC. I'm sure it'll be fine. I go do a DNC. They're like, we really don't like the way this looks. This is one of 4 stages of cancer. Like, it's either the precancerous all the way up to problematic. And the only way we can know which one it is to do a full hysterectomy. And I'm thinking to myself, I know I'm not, like, if you look at people's cancer risk, my cancer risk of being someone who's always been fit is so much lower, right? So I was like going, but I also had no use for my uterus and ovaries anymore. And so I was like, yeah, all right, we'll just get rid of this. Interesting little note. My birth mother, I don't know a whole lot about her. I only met her a couple times, but one of the things she told me about was that she was diagnosed with uterine cancer. And then she went to Esalen, meditated, and they said she was clear. Now, I never got the rest of the story, and I wish I could ask her now, because I'm like, I don't know how they could have told you were clear without being able to go in there and really look. But I thought, well, that's interesting. Huh. So it was interesting. I went and I've been doing Dr. Joe Dispenza meditations now since 2021. And I got this news about this right before going to an advanced follow-up with him. And the whole time at this meditation retreat, he is talking about uterine cancer and healing uterine cancer and how it's, how meditation can help. And I'm like, God, that's so weird. Who told him I had this? Because we've gotten to be good friends. And I went to dinner afterwards and I go, who told you? And he goes, no one told me. I go, you talked about uterine cancer the entire time. He goes, I did. Anyway, it just planted a seed. And a couple days later, I had just gotten to Palm Springs, and Tim and I went to dinner, and I woke up a couple hours later with what I thought was food poisoning. I was in so much pain. I've never been in pain like this in my life. It felt like Edward Scissorhands was inside my stomach, cutting everything out. And I mean, excruciating. I didn't know what to do. Tim didn't know what to do. He could see my abdomen, like it looked like an alien was like banging on it. And we were like, what the heck? Goes on for like 2 hours. And then all of a sudden I get these violent shakes I go from sweating to shivering, and then I fall asleep. Wake up the next morning, look at him. I go, let's go hiking, which is not what happens after a night of food poisoning. And, I just thought, God, that was the weirdest food poisoning. Like that went away fast. Talked to a friend a couple days later. Another person goes, Joe Dispenza, and she goes, oh, those are those light beings that go and work on things. I go, okay. Anyway, I just was like, that was just odd. They go in to do the surgery and they're like, everything looks perfect. There was not a thing, completely clear. So who knows what happened there? I just know, I mean, my whole take on it was, I'm going to just work out to get ready for this hysterectomy. It will be no big deal. It was no big deal. I literally got home at 1, did a conference call at 1:30. 3 days later, they said, you can't lift over 10 pounds of weight after hysterectomy for 6 weeks. I go, okay, why? And they go, well, you don't want to trigger a Valsalva, that could be problematic. You have stitches in there. I'm like, got it. So I just went and worked out, but I didn't do anything that would trigger a Valsalva. Felt great, moved a lot, was really not a big deal at all. And I don't know if, I really don't know, much of why that all went down, but it was pretty easy to get through. And, I'm just, cancer is not going to be one of my realities in life. Right.
Well, you've been in this health and wellness space for years and years, taking good care of your body. And it doesn't sound like this operation or recovering affected you a whole lot. But did you change anything leading up to it or take different supplements to build your body up for somebody going through this or something similar to prepare their body for a trauma in a way? It's obviously for your greater good, but it's a traumatic thing for your body to go through. So what did you do with all that knowledge you have to prepare your body?
So this can be translated to any type of surgery. And I say that because I have, I blew my knee out when I was 17. I've had 5 knee surgeries with a total knee replacement at 52. Then I had to have a hip replacement after that because of the knee, like all this stuff. So I've had a lot of surgeries. And I actually approach surgeries as if I was training for like a competition. And I did the same thing with the hysterectomy. To me, if I'm going to go in, and I know now, the thing I was most concerned with the hysterectomy is not being able to work out for 6 weeks you can lose muscle. Fortunately, there are a lot of things that you can do. And I wasn't going and lifting heavy because I could have had problems, but I didn't stop working out. That was for sure. So the first thing that I always do when I'm looking at a surgery is I start training for it. And specifically, like if it's a knee or a hip, I'm training everything around it to make sure that I get it even stronger than it was before. So I'm training for that. And then there's a lot of stuff that I do coming out of the surgery to help me recover from it. Obviously, you're getting rid of all the blood thinners and stuff when you're going in, but coming out of it, I increase my protein, and I also take essential amino acids because I know my body needs more of that to heal, and also more collagen because of the connective tissue. So coming out of a surgery, I'm, especially when you don't have a whole lot of appetite, and when you've done a hysterectomy, they put all this air. Like the worst part of the hysterectomy was all this gas they blow into your abdominal cavity that makes you look pregnant for weeks and hurts. And so you really don't feel like eating much. So I was doing very timed boluses of protein to make sure I had what I needed, because that's the single most important thing. I'm also careful with, detoxifying. So after surgery, I'm doing saunas to get rid of some of that anesthesia. I think that's a super important thing as well. And then as soon as I can, starting to take things that help with anti-inflammatory, so fish oil and curcumin. But I wait on that because, initially you don't want to do anything that's going to thin your blood. But it's the same thing I did with my son when he was in the hospital, was pushing protein, essential amino acids. At the time I did bone broth because we didn't have things like collagen supplements. But it's that same thing here that I make sure that I have. That helps you recover from these things. I mean, so much easier. I wish that, and hyperbaric as well. So I am fortunate to have a sauna and a hyperbaric at home and red light. So all of those things were things that I was using to help me recover from this.
Throughout our conversation, you're emphasizing the importance of protein, and we've talked about it as protein in general, amino acids as a supplement, collagen, bone broth. How do you look at all these as different tools, and what overlap do you see between them?
So I think the first important tool is food. So we'll start with food. Like, let's see what all we can get with our food, and then use supplements to supplement a great diet. I used to love to say, you can't supplement a bad diet, make it a good diet. And then they did this study where they gave supplements alongside McDonald's burgers and found that they could improve the diet. And I'm like, okay, well, never mind. But let's start with a good foundation. So, eating clean protein to start with, wild fish, grass-fed beef, etc. And then, when you look at eating protein, you've got a couple different factors as to how much you're going to get out of the protein. And I am not a protein expert. And boy, I've been listening to so many protein lectures. I'm like, wow, is this complicated stuff? So I'm looking more at, like, how do I hedge my bets? If part of what I'm trying to focus on here, or what I'm focusing on when I'm eating protein, is getting these essential amino acids, and, depending on the protein source, whether it's plant, whether it's animal, how much fiber's with it, it's going to impact the digestibility, the release, the timing. That's where I'll also add in essential amino acids. I also don't eat a lot of things that have bone broth. So I'll use bone broth protein or collagen to make sure that I'm getting that there. I know there's so much debate in the nutrition space about collagen, but I mean, I've seen enough studies now that make me believe that this is helpful for our connective tissue, for our skin, not for our muscles, but for our connective tissue, for our skin. That's something that I add in. And it's funny, I was talking to Mark Sisson about it. I'm like, hey, maybe we'll find out later this wasn't a big thing, but I'd rather hedge my bets on it and use it. So that's how I see things: is start first with food. I think protein powders can be super helpful if you are not dairy intolerant. I think, and the cool thing with whey protein is, for most people who are dairy intolerant, they seem to be reacting to the casein or the lactose. So if you do a whey protein isolate, you'll be okay there. But if you are, there's great stuff now with pea protein. It's got good essential amino acids. I'd blend that with some collagen. But try to get the first with food, then add those things in. I think some essential amino acids morning and evening, especially if you're having trouble getting enough protein in, or you are just starting to work out and you're more anabolically resistant. I think this makes a ton of sense. Like, I think this especially when people are recovering from an injury, makes a ton of sense. One more piece on the injury part of things. Because, when you really look at the risk of being in a situation where you are losing muscle is what I worry the most about. I have to have another knee replacement because of what happened with my injury at 17. So I'm actually doing that sooner rather than later, because I don't want to do it at 70 or 80. I want to do it as young as possible, but I'm building up that muscle. And then when I come out of that surgery, I'll be doing blood flow restriction training to just be able to continue to push it after the fact. So there's a lot you can do. You can do electrical muscle stim. You can do blood flow restriction training. And I think that's what we really have to focus on is if you're having a surgery, what can you do to make sure that you minimize muscle loss?
How far back was the hysterectomy, and are you fully recovered from that now?
Oh, I was fully recovered in like 6 weeks. So I did it last summer. I remember when they told me that I had to have this, and I said, well, I'm going to Bali on a spiritual pilgrimage with Mary Morrissey. And they're like, well, that can wait. I go, no, actually, this is like it. So I'm going to go do this, and I'll do it right when I get home. And after that, I was going on another trip. And so I was like, all right, well, can I bike ride? Because where I was going was out to the desert, which involved a lot of biking. And they're like, we'd love you to bike ride. I go, perfect. So I literally 10 days after the hysterectomy, like flew out and was camping and biking for a week. And, felt pretty good, like maybe a little bit more tired. But I was fully recovered and all my strength back at 8 weeks, because at 6 weeks, they're like, now you can really push it. But I was just gradually bringing it up over time, kind of, because I knew I wouldn't recommend that to someone if they weren't in the field, but I knew what they were talking about and what not to do in order to not create problems with the stitches. And, but again, even after the first couple days, I felt remarkably better, probably tired for like 2 weeks.
And a lot of our focus to this point has been on building back muscle, maintaining muscle. You did mention bone mineral density early on in the conversation, and I want to pivot to that. This being the other factor that a lot of people are worried about as they age, maintaining that and avoiding things like osteopenia, osteoporosis. When it comes to that specific avenue, how do you look at things differently than we've been talking? Or does that just fit into the resistance training, the diet, everything we've been talking about till this point?
Well, there's a couple things you have to look at here for this one. And, again, if you fix your muscle mass, you won't likely have an issue with osteoporosis or osteopenia, because bone mineral density is a lagging indicator, right? It's the first thing you'll see is poor muscle mass. If you fix that, you'll tend to fix the osteoporosis, and you can reverse this. I wish that we had DEXA scans happening. Like in the perfect world, we would do the first DEXA scan for someone in their teens, because that's when you really want to be focusing on laying down that bone. Here's a couple things that we know. Number one, resistance training is really important for bone mineral density, and specifically things that load your spine and your hips. So this is where a squat's fantastic. This is where a standing overhead press is fantastic. Things that just load the spine, load the hips. They'll talk about walking for bone mineral density. Not unless you're wearing a rucking vest, which I think is one of the greatest things ever, rucking vests. So a couple days a week of a rucking vest, or even just starting to wear a rucking vest around the house, can be a great thing. But really push heavy weights over your head, right? And squat. Now, the other things that are really important is not being catabolic. It's having good acid alkaline balance. So what does that mean? Eat plants with your animals, right? Because if you're eating animals, they're more acidic. If you eat plants, they're more alkaline. Put that together. Eat plants with your animals. Fish oil is great for bone remodeling. Vitamin D with K is you got to have. I find, I'm trying to think if I've ever seen anyone's vitamin D normal without supplementation. And I really can't think that I have. And I think that's one, because we stay out of the sun, we use sunscreen. So do a vitamin D test. It's a 25 hydroxy vitamin D. Make sure you take vitamin D with K. Optimize your vitamin D to 50 to 80 NGs per ml. I'm excited. We're actually getting a vitamin D light machine for the house that we are going to play around with next. So we'll see how that goes. And then estrogen, super important. Estrogen and progesterone, right? So they'll work together to help with bone remodeling. So that is another mission critical one. And creatine creatine showing some potential benefits as well for bone mineral density. So the good news is the things that help your muscles help your bones. but with a little bit more focus too on really optimizing vitamin D, optimizing acid alkaline balance as well.
You didn't mention calcium supplements, and this is one of those ones that's super controversial.
Mm-hmm.
And conventional medicine, I feel, still leans heavily on using that to help women as they age. How do you feel about that?
So I'll tell you where I use calcium supplements. I really love doing electrolytes, especially since I'm a big sauna fan. I think most of us would do well to do an electrolyte 1 or 2 times a day and get it that way. I'm kind of more keen on magnesium. Um, if you are not dairy intolerant, getting in some Greek style yogurt or whey protein, but I don't think that's the big issue. I think the big issue is really more vitamin D deficiency, resistance training. I'm just I don't know, not as big of a fan of that. Although likely it's if you're doing your vitamin D with K and you're taking a little calcium. I know there's concern with calcium causing, some plaque buildup, but I think that really has to do with more of your vitamin K situation. But I don't tend to recommend calcium. I'd rather see you get some, eat wild fish a couple days a week, maybe eat some bony fish, eat some sardines. I wish I could say I did that, but I don't. And if you're not dairy intolerant, doing some Greek style yogurt, but I think we can accomplish this with some electrolytes.
Talk more about the hydration as a whole. You talked about the importance of getting some electrolytes in up to a couple times a day. How do you look at, because I know this is a big piece of overall health and wellness for you, staying hydrated. How do you look at that?
So have you had Rick Johnson on the show yet?
I have. It's been a while, and we're talking about having a round two.
Oh, you
So
got to have a
he's
round two.
great.
I'm kind of obsessed with Rick. Like he is first of all one of the sweetest guys ever, but just so smart. So I have a big professor crush on Rick Johnson. And Rick, I recently interviewed him, and he was telling me something so interesting about hydration. I mean, first of all, when you look at my whole world is really fat loss, having good muscle quality, which hydration's mission critical, right? Talk about one of the most underutilized tools just for appetite control. And I'd love to talk about appetite control, GLP-1s, all of that as well. But hydration, even mild dehydration. So we knew mild dehydration could raise cortisol, and that drinking water improves metabolism, can boost metabolism transiently, like 300%, transiently, not like people are like, oh, I'll just drink water and lose weight. Well, no, it's a little boost for a short amount of time, but it still is. But the bigger thing is what happens when you're dehydrated and mildly dehydrated. We're talking like 1% dehydrated, which you'd never notice, right? Turns out that what happens with mild dehydration is kind of like a camel situation where your liver takes glycogen, frees it up and turns it into fructose. This is not the way we want this pathway to go. Normally, fructose goes to the liver, and we're hopeful that there's enough space in the liver for fructose to get converted to glucose into glycogen and stored. What happens when we're dehydrated is that glycogen gets freed up and converted from glucose to fructose. Fructose is then stored as fat. Now you listen to this and go, why on earth would our body do that? Well, it's the same reason why camels have the fat pad. When you burn fat, you free up water. So if we're dehydrated, our body goes, we better store fat so that we've got water available if we get more dehydrated. Which is crazy when you think about that. So you have the cortisol impact, you've got the storing more fat impact. And then if you're drinking optimal water, what's happening? You've got better satiety. You're able to detoxify well. You've got a metabolic boost. So you're kind of like, well, why would you ever want to be dehydrated? So how do you know if you're hydrated or well is always kind of the question. And that's where these bioimpedance scales can work so well because they're looking at total body water. And in fact, I'll tell you a funny story. When I was doing the Dr. Phil weight loss challenges, we had this competition going, and I had my bioimpedance scale that I would bring in every week. It was this $5,000 segmental Tonito. It was state of the art at the time. And we were having this contest, and the group that lost the most weight over the month was going to get to go to Canyon Ranch. And so we literally that morning weighed each person. We were adding up all their weight, and whoever lost the most weight, the total group won. One group lost by or won by a half a pound. They'd lost 1/2 pound total more than the other group. But I'm looking at the scale and the bioimpedance, and I'm like, what is up? Because I could see that they were super dehydrated. And it turns out what they'd done the day before was they hadn't eaten and they hadn't drank. And they went and they were out like treadmill running all day long. And then they put themselves in their bathrooms, plugged underneath the door of the bathroom with towels, turned on the water to full steam, and dehydrated themselves. So what's great about these bioimpedance, I could see it. I was like, I know what they did, but we didn't say they couldn't do it. So I'm like, oh, that was resourceful. What are you going to do? I'm just going to keep quiet on this one because this will mess up the contest. So that's what's great about bioimpedance scales is it can help you track your total body water, which, more muscle mass, more total body water. We want to see that going up. So it'll help you see if you're where you need to be, or if all of a sudden, boom, your weight drops and your body fat went up. Really, all that happened was you got dehydrated. And so that's one way that you can monitor. The other way is just, as long as you're far away from your B vitamins, it's like, is your urine getting more clear? What I like to tell people is start with basically half your body weight in ounces, and then add a half an ounce to an ounce per minute of real exercise. So if you go to the gym and you spend 10 minutes lifting weights and 20 minutes on your phone, you had 10 minutes of real exercise, which is, I watch people at the gym. That's what I see. I see a lot of time on the phone.
And other than the electrolytes, what are the other things you look for when it comes to hydration? Like filtering the water. Some people add sea salt to add electrolytes in. What are the different things that you're doing to optimize hydration?
So one, I've stay away from the plastic bottles. So filter your water, super duper important. And if you have to buy water out, get the glass. If you can't find anything else, then find those bottles that say that they are BPA free, et cetera. But you can also buy the bottles that will filter it. What I like to add into water is I add in electrolytes, and I'll do 2 servings of electrolytes a day. But I'm going to the gym. What I like to do is electrolytes, amino acids, and a little creatine. And I'm playing around with creatine right now. I'm deep in creatine research as to what the best dosing is. Because when I first started playing around with creatine, I'm like, well, it's all about getting your tissue stores up. So once your tissue stores up, what difference would it make? But now it looks like there might be some reason to kind of dose it throughout the day and drip it. So I'm not quite sure yet. So I tend to either put creatine into my morning smoothie or morning yogurt blend, or I throw it into, if I'm, then I'm going to the gym fairly soon after that, like 30 to 60 minutes. If I haven't done it there, I'm throwing it into my water bottle with my aminos and my electrolytes.
Before we forget, you mentioned wanting to talk about GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic. They're all the rage in the conventional weight loss realm right now. Talk about how you feel about those.
All right. So here's what's interesting. So I was really fortunate. February 2023, I went to a lecture by Dr. William Seeds, who is one of the peptide experts. And it was supposed to be a lecture on GLP-1 agonists and weight loss. And I'd been hearing all this negativity about these and muscle mass loss and everything else. So I was super duper curious. And I go in, I sit in this lecture, and he's starting to talk about, first he goes through all the weight loss stuff and how he does it so there's no muscle mass loss. But then he starts to talk about the other benefits. And one of the big benefits is neuroregeneration. And this was literally supposed to be like an hour breakout. And I think I was there 2.5 hours because I was like, I'm not leaving this guy. I've got to ask him more questions. And the big question was, well, would you use this for someone with a traumatic brain injury? He's like, absolutely. I came home and I put my son on it. And the change has been absolutely dramatic. First of all, because of all the psych meds he had to be on from having a traumatic brain injury and having such an unstable brain, they cause insulin resistance and weight gain. That's all gone. But we use a super low dose and cycle it. And the difference in cognition is dramatic. And so that was super exciting, besides the fact that because of the brain injury, he'd had chronic elevated blood pressure. That got resolved too. And he also broke 13 bones. Well, when you start to dig into these, and I'm going to call them peptides because they're actually peptides, not drugs, right? They're a chain of amino acids with peptide bonds that signal the body to do something, right? And so what they're signaling the body to do is what's so exciting. They can help with reducing overall inflammation. They can help with regeneration. They can help with osteoporosis. They can help with osteoarthritis. They can help with cardiovascular health. So I've started to dig in, like there is so much research on these. And the couple questions I started to ask myself, because I like try to be curious and critically open-minded. And I think the biggest thing I was curious about is like, why is there all this negativity and backlash and shaming around these things? And especially if we've got less than 7% of the population who's metabolically healthy. And I know when someone's dug themselves into a metabolic hole, like you do not get healthy. You don't lose weight to get healthy. You have to get metabolically healthy in order to lose fat and build muscle. Like we've got it wrong. And if someone's super metabolically unhealthy and very insulin resistant, it is really hard to shift. And if you've got something that could make a difference and help them out, why are we shaming people? So that was my head scratching curiosity. And of course you hear all these side effects. But I thought, why are these working? Could it be that we've messed up our guts and we're GLP-1 deficient? And if so, why would that be? Well, there's research actually showing this, that when you are obese, when you are insulin resistant, when you have fatty liver, of which 25% of the population now has non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which is unbelievable. And most people don't know they have it because you wouldn't know unless you were getting the lab tests and then an ultrasound. But all those things can make you GLP-1 deficient. And so, step one is are there ways that we could start to restore this naturally? Because we know that protein and fiber raise GLP-1, exercise raises GLP-1, but what's happened here where people can no longer hear this, where they're not getting these signals that not only help with satiety, but also, and in a couple different ways, like the there's basically stomach satiety and brain satiety. They're two different things. And they both work in both ways, but they also work overall with inflammation and insulin sensitivity and pushing out a little bit of insulin to lower blood sugar. Like there's so many things. So that was the first question. Second question was, all right, so they're obviously, like when you get to that point of metabolic dysfunction, you can't hear it anymore. So the protein, the fiber, the exercise will take a while for gut rehab for that to work. What else could work here? Turns out, and Rick Johnson's actually on the advisory board for this. So is David Perlmutter. So is Ben Bickman. So is Dom D'Agostino. I mean, powerhouse of researchers are on RX Sugar's advisory board. Turns out allulose in a 10 to 15 gram dose raises GLP-1. It's so powerful that you can take allulose and eat a candy bar and lower your blood sugar because it causes a release of insulin. So that's the first thing. It's like, well, that's super cool. Maybe we should get rid of the other sugars and just use allulose that's actually therapeutic. There's also a supplement out of New Zealand that New Zealand government did 10 years worth of research on, $30 million on this hops product that they patented that will raise GLP-1, where allulose will raise it for, like, when you eat protein, exercise, have fiber, this is a couple minutes, right? Allulose, a little bit longer. This CaloCurb product, couple hours, whereas a GLP-1 agonist will just keep it up and around. And I think the challenge with the drugs the way they are versus the peptides the way they should be used is that they're using a sledgehammer instead of bringing a dose up slightly, working on gut rehab, getting people on protein, fiber, and exercise, and starting to get your body to be able to do these things naturally. And using other things like allulose and CaloCurb, so you could use the least amount of these things, so you don't have the big side effects that happen because you're using a sledgehammer when you just needed to use maybe like a nail file, So I think these are like a major longevity peptide. I think what's happening is we're using it as a sledgehammer drug and creating a whole bunch of problems and then going, oh, they're going to have to be on it for life. But if you took someone, used this in a lower therapeutic dose, got them to a point where now they're moving, eating protein, getting fiber in, using allulose, rehabbing their gut, getting insulin sensitive again, which of course sleep and resistance training can help, and then seeing what dose they really need. Maybe there'll be a point like with my son, I'm going to cycle him for, like, he doesn't take it every week. We low dose cycle him to keep all these benefits. And that's where I think these things are really interesting and have huge impact. And I think whenever we have a thing like this, we have to ask the question, why is it working? And are there other things we can do?
A lot of great info there. And the piece you brought up towards the end about having to be on it for life is one of the things I've heard and one of the concerns when it comes to the drug use like Ozempic. Do you know a lot about that piece? You touched on it quickly, but for somebody that's using it for, say, 6 months, a year as a drug, are they breaking their metabolism and can they get that back?
Well, see, I think that they have a broken metabolism and they can use this to heal their metabolism. And I think that's the challenge. I'm on thyroid and I'll be on thyroid for life. I'm on estrogen. I'll be on estrogen for life. My son was going to have to be on blood pressure medication for life. Now he doesn't because of this. He'll be on this cycling likely for life. I'd rather have him be on a low dose cycling peptide than on medications, right? So I think we have to pick these things, but I think we're using it wrong. You've got someone with a damaged metabolism. They're super insulin resistant, if not outright diabetic. I've got a doctor using this here in Florida, Dr. Lisa Coates. She is reversing insulin dependent diabetics. Now, would you rather be an insulin dependent diabetic on insulin for life or be on a low dose of a peptide and use that cycling at a low dose for life? I know which I would pick, right? And so would you have to be on it for life? It really depends on how much you can rehab your body, where it is. Right now, it's broken. If you can get that person, like right now, I'm working with someone who started about 386 pounds. He's 369 pounds. He was moving 2,500 steps a day and with low testosterone. And the first thing the doctors wanted to do was put him on testosterone. I go, but he's, if you look at his age and you look at the step count, you become hypogonadal if you're moving less than 4,000 steps a day. He's insulin resistant with low step counts. Why don't we fix those things and see if it comes up, right? But I know that I have to repair him. Like, he needs to be able to move again. He needs to be able to, like, we're working on his eating, his sleeping. So what this is helping do is shut down some of the noise, helping someone make better choices so that we can heal their metabolism and then go, is this something you'll need to cycle or is this something you won't need to use? Depends how far gone your metabolism is. But the other side is your polypharmacy. You're using all these other things. This could help you to the point where you don't need to use any of those other things. And you maybe just have to use a low dose of a compounded pharmacy peptide, which, by the way, is not expensive. The expense is the drug company with the high dose, where they have a patent on the little pen that you use. So they're using these high doses of the stuff. So I mean, to me, it's all still the same thing. We're trying to get to a point where we can heal someone's metabolism, get them insulin sensitive, get them doing the right things. And then we see what are, like, so they can use a minimum of any things they might have to use, whether it's hormones or drugs. That's what your goal really should be with any of these types of things.
To me, it seems like we're still in the early phases. There's a lot of gray here because of questions like, does somebody need to take this for life? Things like the allulose coming into the picture and maybe being side effect free or less side effects.
There's no side effects with allulose, by the way.
That's great. Where this becomes tricky, I'll let you finish here in a sec, is somebody that could have and would have reversed their insulin resistance and their metabolic health through things like a ketogenic low carb diet, and they decide to take something like this. as an easy way out without having tried all those things first. And then they're stuck on it for life. And then that could turn into a polypharmacy type thing.
Yeah.
So I'm just playing devil's advocate, where I think we need to be really careful about these things, because we know things like type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, they are reversible. And we have prescriptive diet and lifestyle plans that can predictably take most people from point A to point B if they're willing to follow it. So a lot of gray, but there is that perspective as well.
And in a perfect world, we would never have gotten to this mess. We would have no ultra processed food. And in a perfect world, anyone going on one of these peptides would not be able to go on it. And by the way, I know the doctors who are doing it this way, where you have to do a DEXA scan, you have to do resistance training, you have to eat protein, you're eating a low carb protein forward diet. Like, then it makes a ton of sense. And I know doctors doing that are able to get people to use this, cycle down, and get off of them, and maintain all their muscle mass, because it turns out the peptides also can lower myostatin and actually help you hold on to or build muscle. So that whole muscle loss that you're hearing is actually because they're on a crappy diet without resistance training. Like, I don't think these things should be used unless you are going to be monitored and you're going to track your food and you're going to track your body composition. But I know that the doctor here that I was telling you about in Florida with the insulin resistant, the type 2 diabetics on insulin, they already were on the diet. Like, they were already on the exercise and they still were on insulin. And this was what allowed them to reverse that, because of the regenerative effects of it. And that's the interesting piece, is the regenerative effects of this. And if it can do that, like some of these other peptides can do too. Like right now I have a torn elbow tendon from a luggage injury, and I had Prolo or PRP, but I'm also using BPC 157, right? So these peptides are regenerative. And if they're regenerative, then it should be able to be at a point where you don't have to use these anymore because you healed. That's the fingers crossed piece of it. And then the other part is, well, what if we could do it with this supplement or this allulose? And again, those are things that anybody could use. So,
have you tried the allulose with yourself or your son?
Oh yeah. So my son has allulose. He uses allulose. We use allulose every day. I've been playing around with Calicurb. For me, the reason I'm looking at all these things is for the joint, since having big joint problems from, blowing out a knee at 17. I'm always looking at anything that can help with joint health and osteoarthritis and inflammation. I'm all in for. So I use allulose every day. My challenge with allulose is I don't have a sweet tooth. So it's sweet. So I'm always trying to figure out how I'm going to use it, because I'm like, I'd always rather have salty than sweet.
While we're on this topic of metabolic health, insulin resistance, this is something that's underlying so much of the chronic disease these days. And it's so important for people to realize, like I talked about before, that there are diet and lifestyle modifications we can make to work our way back if we've fallen down that path and even gotten all the way to type 2 diabetic. What I'm curious with you is, somebody in that case working with you, type 2 diabetic, what do you do diet and lifestyle wise to help them work back towards metabolic health?
So when you look at this, what you're really trying to do is restore insulin sensitivity. So how do we restore insulin sensitivity? And it's interesting, because the same things that help you age powerfully are the same things that help you restore insulin sensitivity. No big surprise there. And, again, I would start with that first of, let's audit what you're eating. And I like to do things methodically, one by one, where people can get wins so that they'll be more likely to stick. And so it always is that, I always want to know your starting point. And so the macro audit, the protein, then getting up the non-starchy vegetables, 5 or 10 servings or more, adding in, 2 fruits a day, and then really being judicious with the rest of those calories. Like for me, fat should come from clean animal sources, extra virgin olive oil, and then maybe a little bit of avocado or nuts. And then, beyond non-starchy vegetables and fruit, I don't do a whole lot of other carbs, but if you're doing it as close to nature as possible. The piece that's so important for insulin sensitivity, resistance training obviously is huge. It's like, to me, the fastest way I can start to restore insulin sensitivity is resistance training. But the other side is sleep. One poor night of sleep and you're more insulin resistant. And quite often when someone's metabolically unhealthy, they're also having issues with sleep, where they may need to go and have a sleep study, get a CPAP, because if you're not getting good sleep, you will have problems with insulin resistance. So you've got to get the sleep in there as well. Plus you need that to recover from the resistance training. But these things all like they compound on each other. It's like both ways. When you don't do much, the less you can do, the less you do, the less you can do. The more processed foods that you eat, the more processed foods that you want. And the reverse is true too. As you start to eat protein first, we know you've got the thermic effect of food. You're going to burn, like if all you did kept calories the same and replaced some of your carbs or fat with protein, that initially will cause weight loss. But the reality is, and that is because of that thermic effect of food, where it's 20 to 30% of the calories from protein are used in the metabolism of protein versus 5 to 10% of the carbs and less than 3% of fat. But the reality is when you eat protein, and especially I have people eat protein first for this very reason, it's more satiating and satisfying. So you're not as hungry. So you won't keep calories the same. The reality is you'll likely eat less. So not only do you have a better thermic effect from the food, now you're eating less. And I say eat protein first, non-starchy vegetables second, little bit of fruit. And let's see what fat you need in preparation for the vegetables. And then we'll see where you're at. So that's the first part, is really dialing in that piece of it, and then getting in that movement, becoming aware of it, moving more, adding in the intensity, adding in the resistance training, getting a little hit, making sure you're sleeping well. And the challenge with these things is they all work really well. And over the course, like the person I'm working with right now, who's got about 200 pounds to lose, my goal for him basically you're losing about 1% of your body weight a week. So it's slow going when you think of, I have 200 pounds, but I just do 10 pounds by 10 pounds. And we start to look at what things shift. Like, what can we celebrate? We can celebrate you've been tracking your food. Now we can celebrate you're nailing your protein. Now we can celebrate you've got your hydration levels in. Like, just because I know that the habits will dictate the success, and that if you start to live like a healthy, lean person, you will repair and become one over time.
So when you're talking about the diet piece there, you mentioned non-starchy carbs and fruit. For somebody that is metabolically unhealthy or even beyond, how do you feel about cutting those way down, or even all the way down, going as extreme as the carnivore diet, again, in the realm of fixing metabolism and then as a longer term solution?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I really think diets are tools. And, just like there's all these wars over GLP-1, it's like the diet wars. I used to think as an exercise physiologist, like I was like, why are the yoga people and the weight trainers always in a fight? But it's way worse in the nutrition field. Like, it is ridiculous. And you know what? The thing that we know about these diets is they all work. Like, they all have a place. There's, a place where keto works great, where carnivore works great, where plant-based can work. Like, they can all work. So, like, why don't we look at what's the problem we're trying to solve and what would be the best thing for it? And carnivore can be super effective. To me, it's kind of like a protein sparing modified fast that can also just make your gut calm down. Like, if someone's got a lot of gut issues and they need to lose weight, the carnivore diet can be a great place to start, because it just calms everything down, right? And it also takes a lot of decisions out of the way, and it's super satiating. I don't know, like, as long as you're watching things like not going crazy on ribeyes, I don't know how you really can overeat on a carnivore diet. I mean, it'd be pretty tough. So I see a great application for that. And if someone's super insulin resistant, I think pulling, like, that's the sugar impact diet. I was like, get the fruit out. Like, literally eat protein, eat healthy fats, eat a little bit of non-starchy vegetables. Now, I like to add in the non-starchy vegetables because, again, what I really like to look at is fiber for that GLP-1, for gut microbiome, and so that you get to eat some stuff. The cool thing about non-starchy vegetables is it's going to add some bulk to your meals. Like, we love doing cauliflower rice pilafs because it's just like, get to eat a bunch of vegetables. It just adds some bulk to your meals and you get all the polyphenols and the fiber. But I do think there's an application for just going straight carnivore for a while. The one I struggle with is the going totally plant-based. That one's a little challenging for me to wrap my brain around. But, and every time I speak in a consumer setting, I get asked how to do vegan and get enough protein. And it's like, and I was listening to a podcast the other day where they were talking about, it's easy to do. I'm like, not if you're a female who has to really watch overall calories, because every plant-based protein is going to come with carb or fat. And I don't know how to do it without using protein powder isolates and some amino acids, which, is how I would pull it off. But, all these things can be used. And again, I think the bigger takeaway is that diets are tools, not religions. Choose wisely. Just because your manicurist lost weight or did whatever on this diet doesn't mean it's the right diet for you. I find that authors write the diet book that worked for them and then become like a, preacher about it. And you've got to figure out the right thing for you at the right time of your life with the goals that you have.
One of the big counter arguments when it comes to a lower fiber diet, carnivore-ish diet, high animal base, is the microbiome. And you quickly mentioned the microbiome piece there. How do you think about that as a whole and specific things you're doing to maintain that?
It's interesting. I was just with Mike Mutzel and he was like going through this whole thing of like rethinking fiber. And I'm like, oh my God, it's like saying the earth is flat and we thought it was round. It's hard for me to go, okay, I can't, like, fiber doesn't make sense because, I think of things like butyric acid with resistant starch to help with fat burning. So I am not a gut microbiome expert. I don't play one on TV. And so for me, I'm looking more at the polyphenols that we're getting from the plants, all the antioxidants we're getting. Now, I know we can get a lot of this when we're eating carnivore. And, I'm a big red meat eater, grass-fed, grass-finished, but here's the reality. I don't eat, what is it, snout to hoof or whatever?
Nose to tail.
Nose to tail. I don't eat that way. I'm not going to. So therefore, I'm not going to get some of those things that you need to eat that way in order to get. And again, I don't know. I've been recommending non-starchy vegetables with a rainbow of colors for the polyphenols, with the fiber, and berries for years and years and years, and only pulling it out when someone's really got gut issues we've got to recover from. I know that histamine and oxalates and all that are real, but I don't think they're a massive thing. I think it's the minority, not the majority. So I tend to, let's start with building a foundational diet, and then let's look at if you've got specific issues, and then we can go, okay, we need to look at low histamine or oxalates, and even food intolerance, right? But I tend to go majors first. And I find that one of the challenges I see out in our world is I see people majoring in the minors when they haven't even majored in the majors. Like, they're concerned about, the something in their exercise program or something in their, getting a red light therapy, and they haven't even figured out how to meditate yet, or they're worried about oxalates and they haven't even really dealt in their protein levels yet. So I think we need to go majors before the minors, before we start to get into a lot of those things. But I know there's some controversy around the fiber thing. Basically, the way I would approach it is, I'm a fiber fan, but if you've got gut issues and they're aggravating you, pull them out for a while, go carnivore, soothe your gut, do a lot of bone broth, and then go back carefully and retry using cooked before raw, right? And things like applesauce.
I want to make sure before we part ways, we talk about for you what the majors are. And I'm sure we've discussed a few of them today with meditation, exercise, diet, but just to make sure we're hitting on all those and people are prioritizing those, what are those for you?
So the very first most important one, and this is all in that context of powerful aging, is of course the mindset, because what you focus on expands, right? And thoughts create. So if you believe that you're going to be going slowly downhill, you will. If you believe you're heading into the best years of your life, you will. So like let's make the right things real. So that's the first one. The second one is really there are three pillars, and they're not in order because they're all important. And I would say, as you're looking at these, look at where your weakest link is and focus there first. So if you think about the pillars here of what you eat, how you move, and how you recover. And when I look at what you eat, I always start with eating protein first, prioritizing that. Because the thing is, if you're eating animal protein, you're going to get protein and fat. We could live on that, right? So, we can live without carbs, but we can't live without protein and fat and water. So I always start there because I know that if I start there, they're going to get a quick win, start to feel better, drop some fat, and then we can move to the next things. So it's food and then getting into all the supplements, of course. The next one is activity, is exercise. Now, in there, my big focus is lifting heavy things, but I gave you the progression of what we do to get there. And then on the third one, I say it's, sleep through the night. Well, it's really quality sleep. And then what are the things that you need to do to enhance recovery so that you can go out and continue to hit it hard. So, and of course, recovery also is detoxification, improving HRV. So things like meditation, sauna, red light, cold plunge, any of those types of things.
We've touched on supplements here and there throughout the conversation, but to make sure we're giving the full picture of what that looks like for you, talk about what your current array is.
My current array has totally changed. It's been very interesting over the years. And so and I had an interesting epiphany after I went to Korea this past summer. So, and I thought about it. I don't have the same skincare routine that I had at 30. So naturally, I wouldn't have the same, supplement routine. Foundationally for me, fish oil, which has always been, vitamin D with K, magnesium. Those are foundational. And then creatine is a major player for me. Creatine, electrolytes, and collagen. And then I take Mitopure by Timeline, their urolithin A that helps with the mitophagy. And I also take Senolytic by Qualia. So that's twice a month. So both those things, one of them triggers mitophagy, so helps with regenerating the mitochondria. And the other one gets rid of senolytic cells, zombie cells. And then when we were in Korea this summer, we went to the Korean ginseng factory that the government owns and did a tour and got sold $4,000 worth of Korean ginseng, brought it home. And I didn't think a whole lot about it. And my husband started taking it, totally noticed a difference with him. And then, we both got our hormones tested, and both of us needed to drop our hormone levels. And I was like, that is so weird, especially with me having that hysterectomy. I'm like, I didn't think I'd need less hormone after that hysterectomy. If anything, I thought I'd need more. Gosh, what happened? And then I was at a lecture at A4M, and Chris Shade was talking about hormone receptor sensitivity and density. And you know that with insulin sensitivity, it's a big thing we talk about. Well, I mean, it's with all hormones. How sensitive are the receptors? And so one of the things that ginseng does, he was talking about adaptogens and how they make the receptors more sensitive. And that's exactly what happened. And now I think anyone on hormone replacement therapy should be on some of these adaptogens like this very specific Korean ginseng, because you could likely need less of the hormone. I mean, how cool is that? So that's the other thing that we've added in. And I'm playing around with some nitric oxide right now. That was the other thing that I'm doing.
Very cool. And as you share that story about the ginseng being so specific, it gets me thinking about all the potential out there. You went on this one trip and this was brought to your attention, but there must be hundreds of different things that are, certain people are probably taking them, but this whole smorgasbord of different things out there for us to experiment with and find.
Yes. I mean, it's endless. And I always have to check myself because I'll go to these things and end up and I'm like, and now I'm taking 50 supplements, but I'm really looking to going, all right, now that I'm taking Mitopure, I don't need to take CoQ10. Like, where in the pathway are these things working so that I can take less of some other things as well? I do take DIM is the other thing I take, because I think if you are on estrogen replacement therapy, you should also be on DIM to help detoxify the estrogen. So that's the other one I do.
Early in our conversation, you talked about the fact that for you and Tim, you guys played around with intermittent fasting, exercising while you're intermittent fasting, and that turned out to not work for you guys. Share that story.
Oh, yes. So I think the whole fasting, intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding thing can get a little confusing because it's like, well, what is it? Is it one meal a day? Is it eat every 3 days? What is it? And for me, I've been teaching more what I call circadian, like clock eating, very much the Sachin Panda work, which I think his work on circadian rhythm is super important. And that's really what we need to think of when we're eating. So I always was eat within an hour or two of waking up. I used to be you have to eat within an hour of waking up. Now I'm like, wait a little bit, eat like 90 minutes to 2 hours, I think is like the sweet spot. And it was always stop eating, 3 to 4 hours before bed and don't snack. And then I started looking at all the intermittent fasting and I kept thinking, it made more sense to me to do what I would call to be an early intermittent faster. Like, everyone I was talking to was doing like 12 to 8. And I went, yeah, but now you're done eating at 8. You shouldn't go to bed till 11. I go to bed like at 9 to 10 o'clock. That doesn't work. And I would get too hungry in the morning. But I tried. So what I did was I pushed it and I was doing like 10 to 6. And so I was going to the gym fasted in the morning. And I did this for about 3 months. And then I was like wanting to, it was all around the DEXA and wanting to get stronger. And I thought, you know what? I just can't work out like I used to work out. I'm going to try eating again before I work out. 30% increase in what I could do at the gym. And I went, all right, what is more important? It was always kind of a head scratcher to me because when you really think about when you're going to the gym, what matters? The quality of the workout is the single most important thing. That's the driver. It's like, what's the volume? How hard can you go? And I was really reduced because I didn't have, I hadn't eaten. So that was the first part. But the other part that got me was the reason people will talk about doing a fasted workout is because they want to burn more fat. The reality is, if you're training hard, fat shouldn't be your primary substrate. It should really be glycogen and phosphocreatine. But, if you're really pushing it, you're using more sugar, not fat, right? In fact, I was wearing a CGM at the gym and I was like, I got my blood sugar to 200. I was like, go me, I was like really trying to push it. So I went, this doesn't make sense to me because it's not how much fat you burnt during the workout. It's how much it's being in a calorie deficit at the end of the day so that your body can use stored fat for fuel and being insulin sensitive enough for this to happen. And so that was, I'd been having that argument in my head and then going and working out unfasted after doing fasted workouts for 3 months. I was like, okay, that was ridiculous. And that was actually one of the other shifts we made as we went and did this. And I think that's probably one of the things that really wasn't working well for Tim either, was going in and doing this fasted workout. It's, you look at a lot of these things like keto where people are going, you want to do keto so that your body can use more fat for fuel. It's like, well, but you want your body to use body fat for fuel. So it still needs to be calorically restricted keto. Might be easier to do because you're more satiated, but just make sure we're burning the right fat, right? So, what's your most important thing when you do a workout? How hard can you work out? What volume can you push? If some people do great fasted doing that, but if you don't do it. If I'm going out, working out, I'm at a hotel and it's the only time I have to work out is first thing in the morning, I'm not going to eat first. But what I do is I take collagen, creatine, and essential amino acids in a big one of these big jugs and take it down to the gym. And I find that allows me, and a big hit of coffee. And then I find that I can pull it off fine.
You talked about a couple of the supplements you're taking to have a mitophagy and senescent cell advantage on those. It gets me thinking about longer fasts. I know you're not a fan of the fasted workouts as you just got into, but do you or Tim ever push longer fasts to get into autophagy and the benefits there?
So one of the great ways to, autophagy is not an on-off switch, as we know. And, I'm still waiting for the research that shows when it actually starts, which I would imagine differs with people in terms of their metabolic health. But I don't know how you'd even track that because this is not there's not like a biomarker for it. But one of the great ways to trigger autophagy is exercise. In fact, I think that's why people who exercise regularly have such lower cancer rates. I think it's from triggering autophagy, doing that cellular renewal through exercise. So that's how I do my autophagy. I do it through exercise. I basically eat within a 9 to 10 hour window. But I'll tell you what's interesting. I've never been a good faster. Never. Now, I'm also, I have very genetically weirdly low body fat. Like I don't normally talk about it because it's so low for a female that people get all whacked out about it. But even like my whole life, the first time I ever did a body composition test was in my 20s and it was 10%. Then I was a vegan doing all this work, a vegan. Then I went vegan. Then I went and did body composition test a couple of years later. I was up at 25%. But that is the only time I've had high body fat. The rest of the time for me, high body fat was 15%. And I would generally sit like when I did it at 39, I was 13.9. When I did it at 59, I was 13.9. I've always been super duper low body fat. And now I'm sitting between 9 and 10% body fat. And I think that's why fasting for me just has never felt great. I tend to eat a low carb diet. So, I could probably deplete out the glycogen stores and have to rely on not a whole lot of body fat. And maybe that's why my body goes, don't do that. I think that you could do I'm not a big fan of fasting if someone's trying to build muscle, but I think that if you're taking some essential amino acids and doing your resistance training, you can probably pull it off fine. So it really depends what your goals are. But for me, I don't really know, doing my senolytic, doing my exercise. So.
No, you bring in a great point. We're all different. And this might be a better tool for somebody like we were talking about before, metabolically compromised and needing to use different tools, whether it be low carb fasting, to regain that metabolic health. Somebody like you was it 9% or 9 to 10 right now?
9%, and my insulin's at 1.5. So, for me, it just isn't the tool for me. And again, I love that you refer back to that. I think of these things all as tools. If someone's coming in and I need to restore some insulin sensitivity quickly, and drop some fat, we could be using this. And I'd be doing something like essential amino acids and some resistance training to make sure we could hold on to muscle as we were doing it. So, use the tools based on the goals that you're trying to set. For me, I don't know that it would do anything beneficial.
That makes sense. And the last thing I'll end on here is that you mentioned the exercise for the autophagy, that there could be different routes of getting to the same end result.
Right.
Different tools for different people, different tools to get the same result in different people. So very individual. We all have to look at our own situation, apply what's working, experiment, see what works for us. And JJ, really enjoyed this conversation. We'll wrap up here. We'll link up your books, your website, your social media. Really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you. And I love the way you just wrapped that up, because I think what it does is let people celebrate themselves for what works well for them, find the things that work, celebrate your wins. Do not beat yourself up over what you see some influencer doing on social media that doesn't work for you, right?
This is great. Thank you, JJ.
Thank you.
Now that you're done, you're going to want to head over here and catch this next incredible episode. You don't want to miss it. I'll see you over there.
All these metabolic dysfunctions we put on obesity, when in fact we should put on skeletal muscle. It's a skeletal muscle issue at its core.